want to welcome everyone to the subcommittee hearing. I ask that all guests take their seats, and the subcommittee will now come to order. The chair recognizes himself 5 minutes for the purpose of an opening statement. Today's hearing marks the Health Committee's first public discussion on the reauthorization of several key user fee programs at the United States Food and Drug Administration. This hearing will focus on the generic drug and biosimilar user fee programs, and we will turn our attention to the reauthorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act and the Medical Device User Fee Amendments later this month. All 4 of these programs will expire in September and thus must be reauthorized for fiscal years 2018 through 2022. Chairman Walden and I are committed to moving the user fee legislation through committee following regular order with time to spare. I want to welcome Dr. Woodcock back to the subcommittee. I would also like to commend the Food and Drug Administration and industry for the various briefings that they have provided members and member staffs throughout the negotiation process, and for transmitting the proposed agreements to Congress in a timely manner pursuant to the process laid out in statute. Committee staff has been working on a bipartisan basis with the Senate Health Committee to review the agreements in detail and to develop the necessary authorizing language for consideration. I appreciate the technical assistance that the Food and Drug Administration has provided, not to mention the expertise of our legislative councils. It is because of these efforts that we are well on track for a timely reauthorization. Since 1992, with the initial authorization of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act, revenues generated from regulated industry fees have supplemented congressional appropriations and significantly enhanced the Food and Drug Administration's ability to review product applications in a more efficient and a more predictable manner, based in large part on the success of the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. Medical device user fees were authorized in 2002, followed by generic drug user fee amendments of 2012 and the Biosimilar User Fee Act of 2012, both of which are the focus of today's hearing. I look forward to learning more about their implementation to date and ways to improve these important programs going forward. Approval of additional biosimilars will undoubtedly increase competition in the complex and often costly biologic drug market. Small molecule generics already account for billions of dollars in savings each year. Nonetheless, for a variety of reasons, generic competition is lacking for certain products despite the absence of patent protection. We will hear from the Food and Drug Administration and from industry about how improving and reauthorizing the generic drug user fee amendments will help to close those gaps. We will also hear from our colleagues Kurt Schrader from Oregon and Gus Bilirakis from Florida about H.R. 749, the Lower Cost Through Competition Act, a bill that they recently introduced along with a bipartisan number of co-sponsors. H.R. 749 aims to encourage market entry by generic manufacturers in situations where it may not otherwise make sense from a business perspective. I understand that introduction of this bill has led to a robust discussion about additional and alternative ways to spur such competition. That is a good thing. I appreciate the sponsors' willingness to hear from a variety of stakeholders and to work with bipartisan committee staff to improve the bill prior to proceeding to markup. Again, I want to welcome all of our witnesses here today. Apologize for the late start. Thank you for being with us and look forward to your testimony. The chair now recognizes the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Green from Texas. 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank Dr. Woodcock for being back with us and our distinguished panelists for the hearing this morning. Today is the first hearing of the user fee agreement reauthorization cycle. We've learned a great deal since the first prescription drug user fee agreement authorization, and every 5 years have amended and expanded the user fee programs to build on past successes and further support timely review and approval of safe and effective medical products. The affordability of therapies is an issue of growing concern. Robust competition in the prescription drug market between innovator drugs and generic drugs and innovator biologics and biosimilars is crucial to providing patients with greater access to affordable therapies. Generic drugs are proven to be safe and affordable alternative to brand name drugs. It is estimated that generic drugs account for 89% of prescriptions dispensed in the U.S., but only 27% of the total drug cost. In 2015 alone, generic drugs saved American families $227 billion. Similarly to generics, biosimilars hold great promise to make complex products available at lower cost to patients. Due to growing concerns about the time it's taking FDA to review generic drug applications and the backlog of such applications, Congress passed the Generic Drug User Fee Amendments in 2012. Interest and participation in the program has exceeded initial predictions, and the agency has struggled to get the new program off the ground and keep up with the oversized workload and undersized resources. CDUFA 2, like subsequent reauthorizations of the prescription drug and medical device user fee programs, provides an opportunity to address lessons learned from the past 4 years and improve the program so that we have a strong market of safe and effective generic drugs. Following the enactment of the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act, the Biosimilar Fee Act, BSUFA, was established. I welcome to the FDA acronyms. BSUFA 2 provides an opportunity to build on progress made and enhance the program. Stakeholders and the FDA have agreed to review timelines, meeting structures, and new program to increase number of first cycle approvals, which will save resources for sponsors and the agency, and more importantly, make safe and effective therapies available to patients and introduce additional competition in the market. I look forward to hearing more about the agreements between the stakeholders and the FDA on GDUFA 2 and BSUFA 2. It's crucial that Congress authorizes these programs in a timely manner to ensure the agency has the resources and tools needed to support generic and biosimilar competition. I want to mention my concern about the impact of the administration's across-the-board hiring freeze with the FDA. FDA must have an adept and capable and sufficiently sized workforce to make timely scientific decisions in the interest of patients and the public health. Currently, FDA has 1,000 vacancies at the agency, and the majority are which in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research. We work to help the agency attract and hire highly qualified professionals at the 21st Century Cures Act. The hiring freeze threatens the laudable work that could have a detrimental impact on the hiring goals already to negotiated performance goals of the user fee agreements. I hope the administration takes this into account when implementing this deeply flawed policy. We are also here today on H.R. 749, Lower Drug Costs Through Competition Act. Over the past few months, we've had a productive and bipartisan conversations about the proposal and ways to achieve the shared goal of enhanced generic competition. I have concerns as the legislation is written, however, including a concept of priority review voucher for generic drug manufacturers will impact with existing and newly negotiated provisions of GDUFA 2. I'd like to continue to work with my colleagues to improve the legislation. There's a growing bipartisan support for the government to take action to lower prescription drug costs. Rising drug costs is not a simple problem and with a simple solution. While more competition for generics, biosimilars is an important way to make medicines more affordable, it alone is not sufficient to address the problem of affordability. Mr. Chairman, I'd like, before I yield the remainder of my time, my colleague from Colorado, Congresswoman DeGette, just for the public, do you have any knowledge that we're going to have a hearing next week on the markup of the Affordable Care Act?
It's my understanding that the markup has not been noticed, and it will be noticed in a timely fashion if it occurs.
Well, thank you for that little bit of information. I'll yield my time to my colleague.
Thank you. Just in the few seconds left, I want to echo Mr. Green's concerns about this hiring freeze, particularly with the implementation of 21st Century Cures, but also with reauthorization of the UFAs, because I don't see how we can improve access if we have a hiring freeze. The other executive order that we're deeply concerned about on both sides of the aisle is this order that you have to repeal 2 regulations before you can enact a new regulation, because as we're trying to implement the UFAs and also 21st Century Cures, I don't don't see how we're going to be able to use those draconian, I think it's just draconian in this standpoint. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to have a series of questions that I'm going to submit to Dr. Woodcock and our other witnesses about this, but I think this is a concern that we share on both sides of the aisle, and I appreciate your comity, and I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentlelady. The gentleman from Texas yield back. Apparently so. The chair then recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Bilirakis, 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you for including the Lower Drug Costs Through Competition Act as part of this hearing. I'm proud to join my colleague, Congressman Kurt Schrader, to responsibly use the power of the free market to bring lower prices and more drug choices to the market. This legislation would directly address some of the problems we've seen with bad actors in the drug space, such as Turing Pharmaceuticals and Valiant Pharmaceuticals. Too often we have seen the price of life-saving medications skyrocket due to bad actors taking advantage of monopolies in the market. We cannot allow this to continue. Our bill would incentivize drug companies to enter into these markets where no generic currently exists. My constituents in Florida and folks nationwide need relief. I hope that this committee will move this bill this month, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Would the gentleman yield some of his time to me, Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from Texas is recognized if the gentleman from Florida yields back.
Yes, I yield back.
I won't take any more than 3 minutes and 47 seconds. I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Green, for hosting this hearing today on the Biosimilar User Fee Act. Not everything in the Affordable Care Act was bad. I know that's a shock for my friends on the minority side to hear a Republican say that, but Congresswoman Anna Eshoo and myself put in a strong biosimilar section in this committee, in the Affordable Care Act markup when the Energy and Commerce Committee did that. It's one of the few bipartisan provisions. It created a new and distinct biosimilar industry sector. Success of that regulatory provision can only be measured now by how it's implemented. We have thousands of patients, Mr. Chairman, that are facing cancer, inflammatory disease, kidney disease, other serious disorders. We expect that they will benefit from biosimilars over the next decade. Although this is a new industry, I do believe that Congress and the administration have an important role to play in the development and success of the biosimilar marketplace. So while this is not the focus of the hearing today, I would ask that we take a look at this CMS finalized payment methodology that they just finalized. And in my opinion, if that stands, it will dramatically reduce the investment in and availability of biosimilars. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for the hearing. I look forward to hearing the witness. We're glad to have you again. You've been here before. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Pallone, the ranking member of the full committee. 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I must follow up on the little dialogue that you had with our ranking member Green at the end of his statement with regard to the ACA bill. It seems like everyone knows that there's going to be a markup in full committee next Wednesday of the Affordable Care Act, except for the Democrats, who haven't been told anything. And I know you have long been an advocate for regular order. I just want to read this statement from the Speaker. The Speaker on the Today Show on February 28th, he said that the majority's proposed ACA replacement legislation will be carefully considered and completed through the committee process with public engagement and transparency. We're going through the committee process step by step. We're having public hearings. We're having committees work on legislation. We're not hatching some bill in a back room and plopping it up on the American people's front door. Well, I've been told, not by the Republicans, not by the chairman, not by you, but by, K Street and everyone else around here, that you guys can go down to H157 right now as we speak and go in there into the basement, the secret basement that, that the Speaker says would never happen, and look at the bill that's going to be marked up next Wednesday. But I can't go down there. Maybe the lobbyists know where it is. They know what's in it. I don't know what the media knows, but they certainly know there's a markup. Maybe the Russian ambassador's down there, and he can tell us what's in the bill. Maybe they'll let him in, but they won't let me in. And, you actually, I want to commend you again, Mr. Burgess. You were on, Chairman, you were on MSNBC Chris's Hayes last night, and you said that you don't agree with the decision to keep the House's GOP bill secret, warning that it could backfire. You suggested Republicans owed it to the public to share their plan. It's time, put your pencils down and turn your papers in, he told MSNBC's Chris Hayes. So you seem to be an advocate for letting everyone see this. I mean, I would just remind you, I know you always talk about transparency with the ACA, but when the Democrats considered the ACA, the House conducted 79 committee hearings and markups over a 2-year period. The House posted the original language of the bill online for 30 days, engaging in public deliberation before the first committee held the markup. Now, from what I can see, what's going to happen is you may put out a notice Monday of a markup in full committee Wednesday. We come back Tuesday night, and we won't even have 12 hours before the markup would happen. Now, I don't know that that's for sure, but that's what everybody's hearing. So let me just ask you, can I go down right now, myself, Mr. Green, Ms. Eshu, can we go down to H-157 and see this bill? Would you just ask? I'd like to know whether I can go down there and look at this bill.
Were you asking Mr. Green or myself?
No, I'm asking you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I like what you said on the MSNBC, but can I go down and look at the bill?
The chair does not have that information available, but I will find out for you and relay it to you as soon as it becomes available.
Well, I would appreciate it, because I really think that Democrats should be looking at the bill in addition to K Street, in addition to the media, and God knows what goes on with the Russian ambassador. But I want to yield the balance of my time to Mr. Schrader.
Well, thank you. I want to thank the ranking member, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for having the hearing. On a more bipartisan note, I think it's pretty evident to American patients, states, and taxpayers we're paying exorbitant prices for many prescription drugs, and it's really time for Congress to act. Every few months, we're seeing headlines about exorbitant price hikes from unscrupulous bad actors like my good friend Gus Bilrakis talked about, buying the rights to produce drugs. They've been on the market for decades, usually where there are no competitors. Seemingly overnight, these prices go through the roof. The case of Daraprim, drug used by some transplant patients, people living with AIDS. Turing Pharmaceuticals raised the price from $13.50 per pill to $750. Come on, man. Last year, Valiant, another pharmaceutical company, raised the price of their drug to treat lead poisoning, been around forever, by more than 2,700%. That's criminal. For both these drugs and many others, the drugs have been off patent for years and ages. There's no generic competitor in the market. Unfortunately, generic manufacturers who want to bring a competitor face this long approval process we're going to be talking about. I think GDUFA 1's going to help a bunch. But our bill, lowering drug costs through competition, makes a huge difference in getting these drugs to market that much faster. Also looks at the risk mitigation strategies, potential abuse. We have solicited feedback on our bill, look to learn more from stakeholders. This hearing hopefully provides another opportunity. It's important. I'm glad we're able to come together in a bipartisan fashion to make this happen. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. We now conclude with member opening statements. The chair would like to remind members that pursuant to committee rules, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record.
You don't want to?
For what purpose did Gentleman from Oregon seek recognition?
Just to make a brief opening statement, Mr. Chairman, I want to commend my colleague from Oregon and my colleague from Florida for bringing this legislative concept forward. It's one we've talked about. I think it makes a lot of sense. It's a piece of the puzzle. It's not the whole puzzle. It doesn't solve all the problems, but that's how we're going to look at this, a piece at a time, trying to get it right. And so I commend Mr. Schrader, I commend Ms. Bilrakis and others, and I want to thank our witnesses for the participation today. And we look forward to bipartisan legislation when it comes to this and other issues before the committee. That I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. And again, we want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today, for taking time to testify before the subcommittee. Each witness will have the opportunity to give an opening statement, followed by questions from members. We have two panels of witnesses today, and we'll begin with Dr. Janet Woodcock, the Director, Center for Drug Evaluation and Research at the Food and Drug Administration. We appreciate you being here this morning, Dr. Woodcock. You're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Thank you. We're here today to discuss the proposed reauthorization of two user fee programs known by the acronyms of GDUFA and BASUFA that support review of generic drugs and biosimilar drugs, respectively. FDA approval of generic or biosimilar versions of brand drugs after patent and exclusivity protections have expired introduces competition into the marketplace and results in more affordable medicines. Indeed, generic drugs are estimated to have saved the American public $1.5 trillion over the last 10 years. Almost 90% now of all prescription drugs dispensed in the U.S. are generics. Before GDUFA 1 was enacted, Congress, the industry, and FDA all recognized that the program was a victim of its own success, and it was not able to keep up with the flood of applications that were coming in. Congress authorized GDUFA 1, and I'm happy to report it has been a success. FDA has met all the program goals of GDUFA 1. In addition, virtually all the piled-up applications have been reviewed and either approved, they've been sent to the manufacturer for the deficiencies, or they're in a new review cycle. So they are all in process of being of the review process. FDA approved or tentatively approved 835 generic drugs in fiscal year 2016, which is a new record. And over the 4 years of this program so far, we've approved 56 new generics, first generic drugs. Similarly, the biosimilar user fee program is on track to provide affordable alternatives to biologicals. So far, 4 biosimilars have been approved, and we're working on 64 development programs with developers that would provide competition for 23 biologics. We've also issued 6 final and 4 draft guidances. But these user fee programs are version 1.0. We in industry have learned a lot in the course of operating these over the last 4+ years. So over the past year, we worked hard with industry to envision ways to improve the program that meets the industry's need for timeliness, transparency, and predictability, but also meets the public's need for a steady flow of high-quality, affordable medicines. We think the proposals for GDUFA and BASUFA, too, meet these twin objectives of both the public good and working well for industry and the agency. Additionally, across multiple drug user fee programs that are up for reauthorization, we've added new financial management provisions and modified fee structures in a way that will simplify and improve the infrastructure of all these user fee programs. So that is a part of these 2 new programs. As in your work with 21st Century Cures, which we were happy to work with you on, these user fee programs are intended to improve U.S. citizens' access to safe and effective medicines. And it's really be important that they be reauthorized because they are providing that function now. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Chair, thanks, Dr. Woodcock. Thank you for your testimony. We'll move on to the question and answer portion of the hearing. Begin the questioning by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. Dr. Woodcock, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, often reviews and makes decisions on complex novel drug applications for serious conditions within 6 months. Decisions on whether to approve such new drug applications are almost always made in the first review cycle. On the other hand, the median review times for generic drug applications have actually increased since the generic drug user fee amendments was authorized, and in 2015 reached 48 months with only 9% of generic applications approved in the first review cycle. So this doesn't seem like the right direction. In 5 years from now, what percentage of first cycle approvals would you consider a success?
Well, I would consider a success to be a considerable increase over the rate we're seeing now. I think we're up about 10% maybe. It's hard to say with the recent submissions, but we can look at the class of 2014, 2015, and see how many of those have gotten a first cycle approval. And it's still, I think, under 10%. So if we could get up to 20, 25%, it would be excellent, and then keep building that over time. Because right now, if next year, if a company were to send in, if you were a company, you would send in a generic drug and say it would be a first generic, and it were a good application, it was complete, you could be on the market in 8 months.
Yeah, I beg your pardon?
You could be on the market in 8 months.
8 months. So I guess the issue here is really, how do we move the needle so that the overwhelming majority of generic applications are actually approved on the first cycle?
That is one of the goals of GDUFA 2. So for complex generics, we've put in and proposed a program where we would work with the companies before the application was submitted and work out of a lot of the complex issues. These might be applications where there's an injector or other device used with them, or where they're very complicated molecules. But also, we plan to provide more training and interaction with industry up front in general, so that they can get to a point where their applications can be approved on the first cycle.
So that's, under anyone's definition, that would be moving the needle. For priority submissions of non-complex products, which according to the Food and Drug Administration itself constitute a relatively small portion of their overall workload, but are especially important to public health, should the agency have a similar program to ensure quality applications are submitted at the outset? Reduce the opportunity for failure.
Well, we are proposing that, at least for complex drugs, that there be a very intensive program to make sure that they get it right the first time.
Are there additional tools or authority that the Food and Drug Administration would need, particularly in the space that that deals with the development of complex generics under the 505J pathway?
What we are proposing in GDUFA 2 would give us new tools. We would actually meet with the companies in advance. There would be submissions during and interactions during the review process. This is actually somewhat similar to what we do for the new drugs that you mentioned earlier. And I will point out that the PDUFA program, over the 20 years of operating, has brought the first cycle drug approval up to well over 80% of drugs are approved on the first cycle now on the new drug side. But it wasn't that way at the beginning.
Dr. Woodcock, do you think the FDA needs additional authority in order to approve drugs faster on this pathway?
No, I think that we need more the resources that we have negotiated under GDUFA 2 or other types of resources provided, because this is a labor-intensive activity, all these additional interactions with the industry that help them get their submission in shape the first time.
I certainly thank you for being here today. Again, as I mentioned to you before we started, it doesn't seem possible that this is a third reauthorization that I've lived through. I really do appreciate your testimony. I appreciate putting together the list of medications that actually have been approved that may not be generally known. So I appreciate you making that as part of the packet today of information that you shared with the subcommittee. And I will yield back my time and recognize Mr. Green for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Woodcock again, welcome. The review model instituted by PDUFA is a result of lessons learned over the years and a commitment from both the FDA and industry to work towards a first cycle approval. PDUFA now enjoys an average 80% first cycle approval. One common criticism we've heard from of the FDA is the need to improve the quality of applications under GDUFA so it moves more toward approving applications in the first cycle. In fact, you note in your testimony that prior GDUFA generic applications are approved in one review cycle less than 1% of the time. That rate is increased to 9% under GDUFA 1. Following the chairman's questions, follow-up, can you elaborate more on how GDUFA 2 will improve that first cycle approval?
Yes, well, first of all, we're getting industry focused on the fact that the benefits of a first cycle approval. In the past, it was about a median of 4 cycles, and sometimes we'd go up to 11 cycles. The industry would go through in getting their application, and sometimes they had time because they were waiting for patents to expire or what have you. So we're going to focus on that, and then for the very complex ones, we're proposing to put in place a special program where we work with the industry before they submit their application. So that's off the clock, all right? And we help them meet with them and help them get it into place. And we issue certain guidances early, and then we meet with them during the program to make sure the review is on track and that they've answered all the questions.
Okay. Much attention has been given to the backlog of the generic applications. Can you help this committee understand the nature of these pending applications, what the agency has done to address them? I think you may have answered that you're actually working with them before filing. So I appreciate that. On the BASUFA meeting, Dr. Woodcock, when you were here last February to testify about the implementation of BASUFA, you discussed the increasing number of meeting requests that the agency was receiving from sponsors. We've heard from industry that these meetings are valuable in providing clarity about the data and information the agency will need for approval and to address any outstanding questions FDA will have early in the process. What improvements to these meetings with sponsors will be made under BASUFA 2?
Yes, well, those meetings are very valuable. We're all feeling our way in biosimilarity. It's a new concept. It's not safety and effectiveness, it's biosimilarity that provides the entry to the market. And how to prove that is a new concept. So we had not been meeting all of our meeting goals under BASUFA 1 because the industry appetite for them was very large, and we were not able to meet with all the industry that wanted to meet with us. So under BASUFA 2, we've changed some of the timelines. We're increasing the staffing so that we will be able to meet these meeting goals and meet with industry that needs to talk to us about how to craft their biosimilar program. Much of this is analytical work, in vitro work. Sometimes, though, there would even be a clinical trial that would be done.
In the short time I have left, let me just ask too about some of the concerns about I said in my opening statement about the number of vacancies at the FDA and also a freeze on hiring. Obviously that would hurt the process right now. And is there anything the FDA can do now with staff?
Well, as you know, our hiring problems have been persistent for the last 5 or 6 years, and we have run deficits. We are working with the new administration, and we hope that we'll be able to address these issues, continue to address them as we have been trying to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have one other question. Can you explain different considerations given under GDUFA 2 for small businesses? Because that's one of the issues we've heard.
Yes, there is a different fee structure for a small business exemption, so that will help, and there are different levels of the program. Is it small business exemption? Yeah. We can get, it's complicated how we're doing it, so we can get back to you, but we have taken the issue of small business more into account in the fee structure in GDUFA 2.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Guthrie, Vice Chairman of the committee. 5 minutes for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Woodcock, for being here. We appreciate it very much. And do you know the percentage of generic drug applications that go through more than 3 review cycles, or how about 5 review cycles?
Well, it depends on when you're talking about, because that is in flux right now. Historically, the median was 4. So about half were less than 4 or less, and obviously about half were more than 4,
Yeah.
Okay? So now that's shifting a little bit. That curve is shifting to the left, and we hope to see fewer and fewer total review cycles. The reason that's happening right now is because we are doing a lot of information requests, and we're going back and forth with the company during the review cycle to try and get as much of this fixed as possible. And we hope that the vast majority of ones, all these ones that we've been reviewing, will be approved on the second or third cycle.
Okay.
But the older ones may still need considerable fixing up before they can get approved.
You almost got to my next question, but so how many total years, and like when you talk about back and forth between FDA and the company, if you're in 3 cycles, I mean, how many years is that typically? Or maybe even 5 years if you answer both of them?
Historically, that's very difficult to say, all right? Right now, the first cycle is going to be 10 months, all right? And then you send it back to the company, say if it doesn't get approved, and then it depends on when they send it back to us. Right now, the industry, due to our vigor in getting through all these, the industry has 1,800 applications with them that they're trying to respond to and send back in. Well, that's a lot of applications, and they're not going to be able to send them all back in a month. So what we think is over the next few years, if GDUFA 2 is reauthorized, we'll get into a steady state. And you put an application in, and you have a predictable path. You know when you're going to get it back. If it isn't approved, you'll have time. You can rapidly work on it, send it back in a couple months, and it'll be fixed. Now, if I may go on.
Yeah, go ahead, yeah.
What if they have a plant somewhere that has been found to have problems? Now, that may take longer to remediate, especially if very serious deficiencies were identified. So there are going to be some outliers where they can't really send it in again until the issues with their manufacturing or some other serious issue is remediated.
Are the multiple review applications, are they typically from smaller companies or newer companies or with less experience, or does experience and company size not matter?
We found them from everybody.
Okay.
So there's a lot of educational work to be done.
Are there any particular characteristics of applications that come through on the first cycle that you say, wow, these are characteristics that could be expanded throughout the rest of the people having issues with that?
Yes, and we're making a great effort to try and identify that and have more standardized tables and more standardized submissions and so forth, so that industry knows, have we filled everything out? Is everything complete? Is it all in here? We're doing more on the refusal to file, so they get it back quickly and it isn't filed, so they can make sure it's complete before they get in the process and have to wait 8 months. So we agree with you. If we could identify those characteristics, we could help the applications be more complete.
Yeah, well, I wanted to help you and help everybody work better. That's what we're here. So does FDA currently expedite resolution of an inspection-related issue when it is the only obstacle for generic approval, particularly if the case is priority submission? So do you expedite inspection-related issue?
We may expedite ones that are straightforward, but we're dealing with fraud. Sometimes we're dealing with very serious deficiencies, say with sterility of drugs and so forth, and those have to be remediated by the sponsor before we could responsibly approve.
Absolutely.
the drug.
We don't disagree with that. Well, thank you, and you answered my questions. I yield back almost a minute of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey. Mr. Pallone, the ranking member of the full committee, 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Woodcock, I wanted to ask you about the abuse of REMS. I agree with many of my colleagues on the committee that we should encourage and support robust generic competition in the marketplace. However, if we're to achieve this goal, we must ensure that we're limiting barriers to generic entry wherever possible. Unfortunately, there is evidence that some brand drug manufacturers are using REMS programs to delay competition by preventing generic and biosimilar manufacturers access to samples of branded drug products. And these samples are needed by generic and biosimilar manufacturers to conduct the bioequivalence studies needed for FDA approval. So my question is, you note this problem of certain brand companies delaying or denying generic companies access to reference products in your testimony. Can you discuss further how REMS programs are being inappropriately used to delay generics entries to the market, and what steps the agency is taking to curb those abuses?
Well, the REMS programs and other restricted distribution programs restrict general access to the drugs in some cases. And so a generics company would have to get the drug in order to compare it in a bioequivalence bioequivalence study, and also compare back, reverse engineer the product, so they're making a copy. And in many cases, they have been denied access to the drug, and so they're not able to do those things. The steps we have taken, we are willing to review the protocol of the generic and send a letter to the brand saying, you know, this is an appropriate use for the drug, and, you know, it's under, you know, we've looked at it, so that there isn't a reason that says, well, we're worried these people are irresponsible and they're going to take our drug and do something. We've made it clear that drugs, even under REMS, can be used for bioequivalence studies and so forth, but we can't compel companies to give their drug away to a competitor, to a generic competitor. We have also talked to the FTC about this general issue, and, you know, had shared conversations with them.
Well, I mean, are there other tools or authorities that you need or you suggest to address the abuse? I mean, you said that you can't compel. Should we be legislating something?
I don't know the answer to that, but it is I know it is a problem that we struggle with a lot, and that the companies struggle with, and it has delayed availability of generics.
And I mean, I was going to ask you this, but I think you answered the question. But let me just say that you seem to think that that there's, I mean, the argument is made that REMS drugs have high risk profiles that make it unsafe for generic companies to be able to access them for purpose of development. But I think your answer to that is not really.
Yes, and we're willing to look at the protocols under which they are going to be tested, and tell the brand company that we find these acceptable uses.
All right, let me move to the priority review. Prescription drug costs in this country continue to soar, and the examples of Sovaldi, Daraprim, and EpiPen have all highlighted the very real problems. I believe that we would all agree that expediting access of generic drugs is one way we can help to address high drug costs. On average, the cost of generic drug is 80 to 85% lower than the brand name. So my question is, prioritizing the review of first generics and sole source generics is one way the agency can help ensure there is competition. Can you please discuss how the agency currently prioritizes the review of generic drugs and how the timeline for review of an application that is prioritized differs from a standard generic drug application?
We prioritize first generics, shortage drugs, drugs under PEPFAR, and certain other categories where say there's a sole source drug, and we shorten the time that we expect to get done to 8 months. So we move them through more quickly, kind of like the express lane at the supermarket. Okay, so we do prioritize those. Now, it is quite possible that it might be difficult to shorten those timelines more. And the reason for that is the inspections that have to be done. We have to do inspections, and in fact, the generics typically have many more establishments in their application than a brand application has, and they might be all over the world. And if we haven't been there in a certain amount of time based on a risk-based assessment, we need to go do an inspection.
And is this why under GDUFA 2, the FDA and the industry have agreed on this 8-month priority review for certain applications? I mean, how do you get that 8-month review timeline?
Well, it's gotten by, we need to have enough time in which to do inspections in different countries if necessary. And why is that? Why would we want to make sure we had done inspections? Well, recently, for example, we have had cases where testing labs actually switched the samples like this so that the results would come out similar, because you're supposed to be similar. It wasn't going to be similar, so they switched samples so that they'd get the right results. We've had other cases where people are going to release their drug based on their own specifications, and they found it wasn't going to meet the specifications, so they made up new test results. So our obligation is to, if we approve a generic drug in the United States, the public needs to know it's going to work the same as the brand drug it replaces. And that's why we have to go and do inspections sometimes. Now, if we've been in the facility recently, then we might not have to do that. And so we only do it on a risk base based on whether we've been in there and other considerations.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Billarakas. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Dr. Woodcock, for being here. Appreciate it so much. A couple of years ago, Turing Pharmaceuticals took an off-patent drug that treats HIV patients, Daraprin, and raised it by a price of 5,000%. Unfortunately, this was not a standalone situation. Since then, we have seen other drug companies like Valiant and Mylan take old drugs and raise the price because of a lack of competition in the marketplace. I've heard there were about 150 off-patent drugs that exist where we could have a generic, but no generic company has chosen to enter those markets. Is 150 an accurate number? What are some of the reasons for that kind of situation?
Our understanding right now is there are 182 drugs that are off patent and have no generics competition. And there may well be other generics that are sole source where the innovator has withdrawn, because right now there are 546 drugs where the brand name has withdrawn from the market, and some of those may only have one generic. So if you lump them all together, we call them sole source products. They only have one source. And the reasons for that, we believe, are mainly market reasons, that companies don't think it's worth their return on investment. They don't think if they enter that market, they would make money compared to other opportunities they might have to make money. And so many of them have small markets and so forth. For example, there was recently drugs that have, we can file a generic now, and we had 9 generics file for one, and we had 16 file for another. So where there's a big market, there's a great interest, right, in getting a generic. But these small market drugs are maybe that are seen as, not a good income stream, or maybe they'll be overtaken in a number of years. There isn't as much interest.
Thank you for that. Do you know the size of the generic filing backlog, and how old are some of the filings?
There's no backlog in the filing.
No backlog?
Correct. Yes, there hasn't been for some time. That's right. So they are filed within, we are given a certain time period to do the filing review, and we have no backlog within that. Yeah, there was one at the beginning of GDUFA that we eliminated.
Okay, thank you very much. In your testimony, you talk about the approval process. You have 8 or 10 months to review an application, and if they are deficient, you issue a complete response letter. How long does it take for a company to respond?
That's highly variable, and right now, as I said earlier, I believe it's longer than it will be in the future, because we did have that backlog of applications. We got a lot of them through our system. We sent them back to the companies. Right now, there are 1,800 applications at the companies, and that's a surge of responses. They're going to have to prioritize those and get the ones they deem most important back to us first. So we don't control that amount, the time where they're back with the companies.
But on the average, how long would you say?
Well, because it's a moving target, it was different before GDUFA, and it's changed during. I think it's really hard to say. Ideally, it would only be a few months, unless there are facility problems where a facility must be remediated, or we've seen some major problem, say with the data, where they have to go back and re-verify it or redo it. Those would be much longer.
A company that is into its 5th review cycle, right, how many years old could that application be, assuming everyone used their full-time allotted in each section? What would you say?
It's really hard to say.
Can you give me any specific examples?
Well, it might be 5 years, say. It could be 5 or 6 years.
5 or 6 years?
Under review. Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much. Well, you know what? I'll probably yield back, Mr. Chairman, because my next question is very long. Appreciate it. We'll submit it for the record. I appreciate it. I'll yield back.
Chair thanks the gentleman, appreciates his consideration. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Schrader. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Dr. Woodcock being here. And thank you for FDA's attention on this and working with the committee. Nice to see a process in general working very well, and everyone willing to make it work hopefully even better. And I appreciate your participation. Pretty impressive with the backlog being reduced 90% in a 5-year time span. Wish we could do that in a lot of other areas in government these days. But I'm curious about the terminology acted on, in terms of reducing that backlog. What percentage of that backlog constitutes new applications, maybe reapplications, people that didn't even have a good application to begin with, that you couldn't even begin to make substantive comments on? Do you have that breakdown for the committee?
Yeah, it's a pretty substantial percentage. Keith, do you know the number? Okay, we can get back to you on that, but there is a pretty substantial percentage of that, quote, backlog that couldn't be approved or tentatively approved the first time and required going back to the company and then resubmission.
So most of it is just normal, you would call it perhaps normal, didn't quite get it all right.
Correct.
Please fill in the blank.
That's
all right,
correct.
All right. So what about, just, have you given any thought, you've done a lot of good work with pre-application processes and all that. How about just an education session? I mean, particularly for the small outfits that just don't have the team of lawyers or whatever to work through or read all these websites. They're just trying to do the Lord's work. Is there an opportunity for folks to tune into an education session once or twice a year about here's what you need to do and here's some of the common problems we see?
Yes, and we do that routinely and a tremendous amount. And also, we issue guidances on most new reference drugs that come out, the brand drugs. And so we'll issue guidance well in advance on how to develop a generic for that. It's like a
And I'm not
cookbook.
talking just guidance, I'm talking about a real person,
Oh, we do.
sitting down.
So we have webinars, we go to the technical meetings of the associations, we do gather up common deficiencies, and we post lists of these, and we are really trying, but we'll think it'll take, we're seeing improvement. We're up to 9%, right? First cycle approvals with the new ones.
Right.
But we think it'll take time. We don't like cycles either because it increases our work. It slows time to access.
Sure.
And it just clogs up the system. But we will, I agree, education is the key to get, and also a refusal to file, we list all the reasons.
So with all that, getting to my colleague, Congressman Belrakis' point, if you're doing all this, there seems to be, I think, a number of cycles that we should allow the reapplication for, and then maybe cut it off. I mean, at some point, if you're doing all the upfront work and everyone agrees you're doing the education plus the guidance plus the review, at some point, so that the backlog, out of the 1,800 or whatever it is that are still in the backlog, how many have been, be interesting for us to know how many have been through 1 cycle, 2 cycles, 3 cycles to get to the average or whatever, and because there's some due diligence on a company's part, to not waste your time or the taxpayers' dollars.
Yes. Well, we could certainly provide you with what statistics we had. As part of getting this whole program up and running, we put in a new IT system that tracks the process from soup to nuts, so to speak. And we can get reports out of that. And I'm trying to get these reports by cohort, like the class of 13, the class of 14, the class of 15. What happened to them? How many cycles?
That would be really helpful.
Yes. So we're very interested in that, too. We can provide you with what information we have on that.
I guess the last comment I make, Mr. Chairman, is that our bill, we're really trying to target those life-saving medications. These are medications that aren't just a public health priority, which you already prioritize, but these are, immediate, either acute or chronic healthcare life-saving medications we're trying to accelerate to market. And generally, the ones we're talking about aren't very complex. Wouldn't take, hopefully, FDA's resources to an extreme, and many can be manufactured right here in the United States to decrease that global footprint you talk about that would really require a lot of time. And I think that's the rationale between our bill, trying to make sure that that is the top priority because it is life-saving and has to be done almost immediately. And I appreciate your efforts on our behalf. Now I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Long. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Mr. Chairman, today we're discussing issues of competition and ways we can improve drug development to lower cost in the private drug market. On that theme, and before I forget, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the FTC to CMS outlining ways in which we can best maintain a system of competition and transparency between providers and payers in this market. Dr. Woodcock, to promote the goal of achieving first cycle approvals and approvals on the earliest legally eligible date, industry has placed a focus on increasing transparency and communication during the review process. Under the current agreement, how often and at what stages of the review and approval process does FDA communicate with the applicant?
Well, we usually don't communicate with a technical matter with the, well, let me start again. There is a process called controlled correspondence. That was part of GDUFA 1 agreements, and we had a backlog of that. Okay, we're totally caught up with that, and we answer all these. These are inquiries from sponsors that are written that we can answer about their application, and we send those back, and we get hundreds of those every year. So we're in written communication. But right now, we do not really have meetings and those type of communications with applicants prior
So
to.
you're not getting any type of feedback or anything from the applicants?
Not currently. That's not how the process was set up.
Okay.
However, the proposed GDUFA 2 for the complex generics will set up more processes that we can talk to the applicants beforehand. For the more simple generics, which are many of them, the guidance that we put out before they start making their product should provide all the information they need on submitting an application and what they need to do. It's basically a cookbook.
Okay, with that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshoo. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Woodcock, it's nice to see you again. Even though he left a while ago, I want to publicly acknowledge the kind and generous remarks of Congressman Joe Barton relative to the biosimilars legislation that became part of the ACA. It was a big vote in the full committee here, 47 to 11. It was Senator Kennedy's legislation in the Senate, and his Republican sponsor was Senator Orrin Hatch. So when I hear the steps being taken to fulfill what we set out to do, it was to bring biosimilars forward, essentially in the form to create a generic biosimilar. And so that was a while ago. We passed the ACA several years ago. So this didn't, the implementation is slow, but each step is very important. Dr. Woodcock, I read your, all 24 pages of your written statement last evening, and I think that what I drew from it is the following. The progress is being made on several fronts. I think that when we talk about hiring freezes and words that are very familiar around the Congress, they start losing their meaning. They start losing their meaning because if, in fact, what you have, the agreements that you have entered into with industry partners on user fees for both of these reauthorizations, if you don't have the staff, forget the timing of these applications or the timeliness of when these applications can really get to market. So I don't know if, well, I hope that there will be advocates from the majority that will point this out to the administration. Because I think every question and comment today, with the exception of what Mr. Pallone said in the beginning about will there, won't there be a hearing next week or a markup next week, they have all been tied to timeliness. And so I just want to underscore that. I also want to add something else to this, and that is that these user fees are private sector dollars. And all of this business with sequester, I did legislation on it so that the FDA would be able to have access to those dollars. And it made it all the way up to the conference committee and someone pulled it out. But I still think that it is a very important, it's something that's very important to appreciate. And so those private sector dollars should not be treated the way the public sector dollars are treated. And I think FDA is more than entitled to use those dollars as a result of the user fees in order to accomplish all the things that you wrote about in your 24-page written statement. I want to turn to something that I've been pursuing, well, now it's more than a couple of years. We all know that the FDA plays a critical role in protecting the health of all Americans. But all the members of this committee may not be aware that there is an FDA's Office of Women's Health. And it was established by an act of Congress in 1994, and I think it demonstrates the impact, the importance that the FDA and Congress placed on ensuring that the FDA adequately considers the impact of its decisions on women, which leads me to sodium oxybate. This is an important drug, but it's also a dangerous drug. It's also a dangerous drug if it gets into the wrong hands. We know that, well, I think that we all feel that we read too many stories today about sexual violence against women, and there are, it's just the list goes on and on. But what I want to pursue with you, and I have a stack of letters. I mean, it's like we're pen pals. I'm not satisfied on the following front, and that is that as the drug moves to a generic version, that the word safety with a big red stamp can honestly be placed on the generic. And you know that I've had misgivings about it. What I'd like to ask you today, because there's not a lot of time, I have a minute and I think I've gone over, is to ask you to make a commitment today to me, to meet with me and the women advocates and that care so much about this. Would you be willing to do that?
I'm happy to do that.
All right, that would be great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady and recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman Burgess. Thank you for holding this very important hearing today. These agreements that we are talking about, Mr. Chairman, are so important to improving public health, and they represent good faith negotiations between the prior administration and industry. They show the way that the FDA should work, and it is my hope that the current administration does not stand in the way of progress. The advances in biologics and generics have been quite significant. Generics have saved our healthcare system nearly $1.5 trillion over the last 10 years. Biologics have helped develop treatments for serious diseases like rheumatoid arthritis. It is important that we continue to build on this progress by supporting the FDA's agreement with industry. However, it is highly concerning that this administration seems to not understand the challenges facing FDA in ensuring safety while working with industry to approve treatments. The administration believes that the process at the FDA is, quote, slow and burdensome, end of quote. Despite a record year of generic drug approvals or tentative approvals in 2016, it is critical, therefore, that the administration respect these agreements and ensure that the FDA has all of the resources that it needs to review these important treatments. If the administration truly wants FDA to protect public health and fulfill its mission, it should not implement a hiring freeze that could prevent the replacement of key personnel. Now is the time to staff up at the FDA and other agencies as well, whose mission it is to work for the betterment of public health. It should also follow through on Congress's promise to provide additional resources to the FDA, as this committee did through the 21st Century Cures Act. Lastly, the administration should nominate an FDA administrator committed to the agreements reached with industry and not someone who wants to simply accelerate drug approval without concern for safety and efficacy. Dr. Woodcock, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for the FDA's efforts to reach these agreements with industry. And I appreciate your explanation of how additional resources were important in implementing the first act. Do you agree or disagree that the additional 1,000 new employees hired during the first agreement helped increase the FDA's responsiveness to these applications?
Absolutely, they were essential, and that's part of our agreement, and then our track record that we have succeeded with this program.
At the end of January, Democratic leaders on this committee sent a letter to the administration asking for clarification about the January 23rd executive order implementing the freeze. In that letter, they asked whether federal hiring for programs supported by user fees at the FDA would be subject to the freeze, or if those programs might be eligible for an exemption from the executive order. I'm concerned that this executive order could in fact make it more difficult to implement these agreements and respond to the applications. Can you please describe the potential impact of the executive order on the generic and biosimilar user fee agreements?
Well, as I said earlier, we are working with the administration, and we hope we can move forward on all these programs, but we are working closely with the administration now.
All right. I wish you the best of luck on that. Dr. Woodcock, you described significant challenges in hiring staff who can address the complexity of biologics. How can the additional hiring authority in the 21st Century Cures Act help with that? Does executive order compromise any of those hiring authorities?
Well, I want to thank the committee for their work on 21st Century Cures. I think it is a good step forward. We are working on planning the implementation of the various provisions within 21st Century Cures, and we hope to continue to move ahead on that.
All right, like Mr. Billaraka said a few minutes ago, my last question will consume the time, and so I'm going to yield back. All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Mark Wayne Mullen. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Woodcock, thank you so much for being here. I know you're doing the best you can underneath the circumstances, and I really appreciate your focus on industry. I mean, that's where it starts. A big focus I have is obviously watching over small businesses too. And one of the concerns I have, or the primary concerns really I have, is over the CDUFA. Am I pronouncing that right, by the way? These acronyms we have up here sometimes might be easier to explain them rather than say them. Was it didn't provide any relief for small businesses? Do we believe on the second CDUFA it's being addressed?
It's being addressed in two ways. One, for the first filing, people will not have to pay fees if they're not on the market for their manufacturing facility. Those were the people who were the hardest hit, those who had the contract manufacturing. And then we're also the fees are going to be tiered. There's a different fee depending on the volume in the various company programs. So there's various tiers. So we were very conscious of the small business and also the different size of the businesses. And we tried to craft with industry the fee structure in a way that would be fair to everyone.
Thank you. And another concern we've been hearing is the inconsistency on the FDA inspections. Some businesses we've heard have been put on hold. Are we addressing that?
The FDA is going through a huge reorganization of our field force, which is
Right.
not the Center for Drugs, it's the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which houses all our inspectors or our field inspectors. And they expect in May to go into a reorganization, at which time they'll have a pharmaceutical inspectorate. In other words, a group of individuals who will solely inspect drug manufacturing facilities instead of, inspecting foods maybe and the devices and so forth. And so we hope to have a very close relationship with them. We've worked out a new process by which these facility evaluations will be done between us. And we hope that one of the big payoffs is going to be a great deal more consistency in how we approach these facilities.
With these field inspectors, do they have SOPs, standard operating procedures?
They do. They have compliance policy guides, they call them, which guide how you do an inspection and so forth. But we're also working on what we call the new inspection protocol, which will be a much more of a checklist type of thing. We're piloting that now.
One of the most frustrating things, and the reason why I'm really focused on this, especially with those businesses that have been put on clinical holds, as a small business owner myself, it is imperative that I deliver a same product over and over and over again. And I'm in the service industry, and we have well over 150 individuals that work with us, and we're constantly trying to improve our operating procedures. But when you have people that have the authority that the inspectors do, and they're inconsistent in delivering that, just standard operating procedures seems like that would clarify so much that we have and bring clarity to and a surety to those that they're going in and inspecting. And I get, you have a new field staff, but surely there's ways that we can help, we can work together with bringing consistency to the industry, because the last thing we need is inconsistency on something that's so important with the Food and Drug Administration.
Well, I agree with you, and actually yesterday marked a landmark where we signed a mutual reliance agreement with Europe over working to rely upon their inspections in Europe, and they would rely on ours in the U.S. And to do this internationally, which will really help on speed that we've been talking about today and help leverage other inspectorates, we need to move toward common procedures.
Agreed.
So that we can understand what each other has done and feel comfortable relying on it. So we're working in that international area too. But I completely agree with you, and we are actually working on underneath our concept of operations we've put forward for the new structure. We're working on SOPs. That is the next step.
Thank you. If I can be of any assistance to you in it, please let me know. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Georgia for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Woodcock, good to see you. Thank you for being here. We appreciate your participation in this. As I understand that the Generic Drug User Fee Act was designed to speed up access, and that you were going to get help from the companies, from the manufacturers, the generic manufacturers, in order to speed up that process, and it was somewhat of a trade-off. And I think the original idea was good, and certainly to a certain extent it has worked. But let me ask you, of the 6,000 outstanding abbreviated new drug applications, what percentage of those would you say have begun the process of being reviewed by the FDA?
All.
All of them have begun?
Right. Well, first of all, I'm not sure where the 6,000 comes from. There was 2,800 and some right before the program started, and then we've gotten a certain number each year, up to 1,000 each year since the program started. But meanwhile, we're approving some, all during that period
Okay.
as well.
What can we do to help you? What can Congress do? Tell me what we can do and
You can probably pass GDUFA too, okay?
Okay.
Because what you're maybe hearing, all right, is that the old applications, the ones that were sitting there well before this program started, when they come out, they're going to be 5 years old because
Exactly.
they were sitting around all that time.
Sure.
But the ones, say, next October, if you pass this legislation or something near it, the agreement is in 10 months, you send in a good application, in 10 months you're on the market. And we hope as many as possible will get that first cycle approval, either tentative approval or full approval, depending on the patent status, so that they're off our plate, okay? They're done. And we hope to continuously improve that over the next 5 years so that by the end of that time, most of the applications would go through and be out on the market.
Okay, I trust you, and I hope you're right, and I hope that's the scenario that plays out. Hang with me for just a second. As you know, I'm the only pharmacist currently serving in Congress, and I'm under a lot of pressure trying to answer what is going on with prescription drug pricing. Why are these drugs going up? We've had instances over the past 2 years that I've been a member of this august body where we've had bad actors in the marketplace, where we had Turing Pharmaceuticals, where we had Valiant, where we had Mylan. And now we've got, just recently, we have this drug come out, the Deflazacort, that's going to be marketed as Inflaza by Marathon Pharmaceuticals. Interestingly enough, I just recently found out that CEO was also involved in the Valiant case. So, you know, this is not something new with him. My question is this. I've had compounding pharmacies come into my office and tell me we could have helped in that situation, particularly with the situation with the Daraprim and Turing, that they could have marketed that, but they needed FDA to give them that authority to do that, and they couldn't get it. FDA can help us in these situations where these rogue companies, if you will, have us by the short hairs, and we cannot do anything about it. We've got the ability out there, and I know the safety part of it's extremely important. I respect that, and I'm very sensitive to it. But at the same time, I think it's irresponsible of us, and I say us being government and the FDA, I put us in the same bucket there. I think it's irresponsible of us not to at least attempt to do something about that.
Well, we are happy to work with Congress. There's a range of options that people brought up and we're willing to work with Congress.
Okay, well that's what I'm telling you. That's what the people coming in my office are telling me, is that they had an alternative to the Daraprim, but they couldn't get it approved through you to get it marketed.
Well, yeah, we don't approve compounded drugs. That's mainly under state, as you know, but there are a number of issues, probably too complicated for a 5-minute conversation.
Exactly.
But we're certainly, the issue of sole source or only a few source drugs, where then they're vulnerable to market, they will, you can rise up the prices easily.
Exactly.
Is a problem that many people are trying to address. As I said, there are 182 drugs that we know of that are off patent and have no generic competition right now.
And let me tell you, we need to address that, because that is not the way the system was set up, and that's not the way the free market ought to be working. Those drugs ought to have generics as soon as they come up. What's causing that? Do you know?
We believe that their market forces, it's not attractive enough to get into, to be a competitor. It's a small market or has some other characteristics where the generics are not interested. I mean, this has been going on for years, so there people had plenty of opportunity to submit generic applications, but they haven't.
And that seems to be what we're headed toward. That's what the Inflaza is doing. I mean, this is for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I mean, it's, you know, they've got a limited market that they are catering to. And we need to make sure those patients, and they need it now. They can't wait.
Well, that drug is newly approved in the United States, so it's protected by various exclusivities.
But that drug has been being used in Europe for years.
I know.
And is just much less than what they are going to be charging for it in America. Now that's outrageous. That's where I don't like the federal government being involved in anything, but we need to step in there. That's wrong.
So that's the situation. So there are some brand drugs that, you know, that have pricing issues in people's mind, and then there are generic drugs or brand drugs that actually could have generic competition that don't have them.
You know, I can accept it to a certain extent if it's innovative, but that's not innovation there. That's just bringing something over here and playing the market.
Sure.
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I know I went over my time, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair thanks the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
I misspoke earlier in my oral. Could I just give you a very brief correction?
correct, sure.
Thank you. I said we've approved 56 first generics. What I meant is in the backlog cohort only, there were 56 that we've approved, all right? And we've approved 405 first generics overall during GDUFA 1. So I just wanted, it's in my testimony, but I just wanted to correct the record here. Thank you.
Very well, and we appreciate you being here with us, Dr. Woodcock. We are not going to recess, but immediately transition into our second panel of witnesses, who we thank for being here today and taking the time to testify before the subcommittee. Again, Dr. Woodcock, thank you for your testimony. As a reminder, each witness will have the opportunity to give an opening statement, followed by questions from members. So the committee will come back to order. Again, I want to thank our second panel of witnesses for their being with us today and appreciate their indulgence. Our second panel of witnesses today includes Mr. Adam Cockle, Senior Director of Health Programs at Pew Charitable Trust, Mr. David Goff, Senior Vice President of Science and Regulatory Sciences, Association for Accessible Medicines, Mr. Bruce Leischer, Senior Vice President and General Counsel of Momenta Pharmaceuticals and Chair of the Biosimilars Council for the Division of the Association of Accessible Medicines, Ms. Juliana Reed, Vice President of Government Affairs, Coherus Biosciences, and immediate past President of the Biosimilars Forum, and Ms. Kay Holcomb, Senior Vice President of Science and Senior Vice President of Science Policy, Biotechnology Industry Organization. We appreciate all of you being with us today. We will begin our panel with you, Mr. Cockle, and you are now recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Green, and members of the subcommittee. Appreciate the opportunity to present testimony. Pew is a nonprofit, nonpartisan research and policy organization with programs that touch on many areas of American life. I was asked today to focus on the challenge of rising pharmaceutical costs within the user fee context and beyond it. As you know, drug spending in the United States topped $300 billion in 2015. That's up 9% just in that year alone. That's faster growth than the rest of healthcare, and it's a trend that strains budgets and helps drive up insurance premiums and the cost of Medicare and other taxpayer-funded programs. It also hits consumers in the pocketbook, and 3/4 of Americans say that prices are unreasonable. The evidence suggests this is not a short-term fluctuation, but a long-term trend, a trend that's driven largely by the rising cost of new medicines, especially high-cost specialty drugs, which are used by only 1 or 2% of the population, but account for about 1/3 of drug spending. Some of these products are exciting therapeutic advances, true breakthroughs. Some are not. But they're reaching market at ever higher launch prices, and year-on-year increases in price after launch are another major contributor to rising drug spending. A number of generic drugs have also undergone steep price hikes, but in general, generic prices as a category remain flat or falling. So what can be done in response? While changes to FDA's approval process may offer some potential to address drug spending, many key opportunities lie elsewhere. Generic competition has long been the main tool to manage drug prices in the United States, and the first GDUFA agreement has helped reduce the backlog of pending applications. Other potential areas for efficiency include policies to ensure that generic companies have access to brand name products for bioequivalence testing, policies to limit so-called pay-for-delay settlements that in some cases cause anti-competitive delays in market entry. The Lower Drug Cost Through Competition Act would award a generic priority review voucher to manufacturers who bring drugs to market in cases of limited competition or a drug shortage, and would establish a 6-month timeline for FDA review of priority applications compared with the 8-month priority review goal in GDUFA 2. It's important to note that FDA does already prioritize generic applications when there's only one competing product, so the net benefits and practical feasibility of a 6-month review are a little bit unclear. Perhaps more important than shortening the duration of review is reducing the number of review cycles, and I commend the FDA and the industry for their shared commitment in GDUFA 2 to improving first cycle success rates. When focusing on measures to increase competition, we should note that the biologic drugs, which are a big driver of increased spending, won't be affected by changes in the generic approval process. However, anything that hastens biosimilar development, including better aligning the exclusivity for biologics and small molecules, would help to reduce spending. There are also potential ways to increase competition among drugs that are already on the market. There are well-established tools in the commercial insurance market, tools like formulary placement and prior authorization, that are absent or limited in parts of the Medicare program, and consideration could be given to policies that would increase competition within Medicare Part D and Part B, and potentially shift some drugs from one program to the other. More broadly, factoring value into coverage decisions, including the choice not to cover a drug whose cost isn't justified, will help reduce overpayment for marginal clinical gains, and Congress could take steps to help advance this alignment. Finally, there are opportunities to improve transparency in purchasing. Pharmacy benefits managers negotiate deep discounts from drug companies on behalf of their employer and insurance clients. But these contracts can be extremely complex, making it difficult for even sophisticated clients to determine whether they've achieved an optimal share of savings. Congress could consider requiring greater transparency of contract terminology and definitions between payers and PBMs, as well as mandating the ability to audit these arrangements. The balance between access to innovative medicines and constraining cost growth is a long-term challenge with no single solution. In striking the right balance, Congress should look both within and beyond the user fee agreements. I thank you for holding this hearing and welcome your questions.
Gentleman yields back. Chair, thanks, gentlemen. At this point, the chair would like to recognize the chairman of the full committee.
I thank Subcommittee Chairman. I appreciate the indulgence of the committee and our witnesses. We need to deal with a slightly different matter that involves us all. And I just want to clarify, because I know there have been questions that have been raised. Reports that the Energy and Commerce Committee is doing anything other than a regular process of keeping its members up to speed on latest developments in its jurisdiction are false. We're continuing to work on drafting and refining legislative language to provide relief from a failing law, and by that I mean Obamacare. Part of that process is giving committee members and staff the opportunity to work closely together to draft a bill that reflects the concerns of our constituents and reflects our mandate from voters to repeal and replace Obamacare. Simply put, Energy and Commerce majority members and staff are continuing to discuss and refine draft legislative language on issues under our committee's jurisdiction. And with that, I yield back to the chairman.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Mr. Goff, you're recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement, please.
Thank you, Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Green, and members of the Subcommittee on Health. And first, let me thank you for asking me to participate in this very important and timely hearing. I'm David Goff, Senior Vice President for Sciences and Regulatory Affairs at the Association for Accessible Medicines, AAM, formerly GPHA, and I'm a licensed pharmacist. AAM represents key stakeholders to the generic industry, and generics represent 89% of all prescriptions dispensed in the U.S., but only 27% of the expenditures on prescription drugs. As such, generic drugs play an ever-important role in bringing down artificially high prices of drugs, thereby keeping medicines within the reach of the American public. I'd like to begin today by commending the committee for your continued focus on these important issues as we examine them here today. The generic industry's remarkable growth plays a vital role in the lives of Americans every day. This growth in the generic industry has also served to underscore the critically important role of the FDA. And as I will highlight, the level of cooperation between industry and the FDA has never been greater. However, the agency remains underfunded, and the responsibility of ensuring access to safe, effective, and affordable medicines is a shared one. That's why the generic industry has agreed to provide FDA with additional resources to address these ongoing challenges. I'm here to discuss AAM's conviction that the best way of achieving the goal of providing patients access to generic alternatives is through the development of policies that promote robust competitive markets. Generic manufacturers make complex analyses when selecting which products to pursue. This analysis can include assessing the complexity and reverse engineering, the state of intellectual property of the product, the size of the market, the likely number of competitors, the product development and manufacturing capabilities, and all costs associated. Because of these complexities, AAM believes that the best way to control drug costs generally is through the policies that incentivize competition, and GDUFA II does just that. The priority of the generic industry in GDUFA II was to achieve a more effective and transparent generic review program. We believe that accomplishing this will improve the rate of first cycle approvals on the earliest legally eligible date through greater transparency and communications between the agency and the industry. Thus, both FDA and the generic industry benefit by sharing knowledge and experiences throughout the review process. Our goal is not merely a faster review timeline, but a more effective review process. The fewer review cycles required to get to approval, the sooner patients and payers can experience the benefits of generic competition. We strongly believe that GDUFA II is well positioned to achieve this goal. A few of the key areas to focus on: application metrics. So the FDA will act on 90% of all ANDAs within 10 months for standard application, and all those indicated as priority within 8 months. And this includes the inspection component of the review process. Bridging, or we called it no ANDA left behind. Prior to the completion of GDUFA I, all applications and supplements that did not have an official GDUFA I goal date and were subsequently given target action dates will be assigned a GDUFA II goal date on or near October 1 of 2017. Complex products. GDUFA II creates a pre-admin submission communication pathway for complex products. This early engagement between industry and the FDA will significantly contribute to the applicant's ability to improve the overall submission quality of ANDAs, which in turn will contribute to first cycle approvals. Transparency and communications. This agreement includes transparency and communications between FDA and the ANDA applicant through liberal use of information requests, division review letters, and the complete response letter. These enhancements are intended to decrease the number of review cycles and move them for first cycle approval. Reporting and accountability is also included, with several new performance and financial reporting requirements to enhance transparency and efficiently maintain them. These new reporting requirements will allow Congress, industry, and FDA to better assess FDA's resource management, planning, and processes. Small business consideration. The proposal supports small businesses by exempting them from a facility fee until the first ANDA is approved in that facility. And the proposal also provides for tiering of the annual ANDA program fee based on small, medium, and large companies, and this tiering is based on the number of approved ANDAs those companies hold. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the GDUFA II user fee proposal is a culmination of months of negotiations between FDA and industry, and the final product, as transmitted to Congress, represents a careful balance among all stakeholders involved. We respectfully urge that the committee to approve GDUFA II as negotiated and agreed to by the FDA and industry without changes to this agreement. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back chair. Thanks. The gentleman, Ms. Reed, you're recognized for 5 minutes for opening statement, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to be here today. I'm Juliana Reed, Vice President of Government Affairs for Coherus Biosciences and the immediate past president of the Biosimilars Forum. I was a member of the Forum's Biosimilar User Fee negotiating team last year. The Biosimilar Forum appreciates the opportunity to testify today regarding its participation in the negotiations for the BSUFA program for fiscal years 2018 to 2022, or BSUFA II, and to provide our perspective on the reauthorization of the user fee legislation. We urge Congress to support the outcome of BSUFA II and to reauthorize the program prior to September 30th, 2017. The Biosimilars Forum is a nonprofit trade association representing biosimilars manufacturers. We're dedicated to the development of a new and sustainable biosimilars market in the U.S. with the goal of expanding access to these important medicines while lowering the cost for patients and the overall U.S. healthcare system. The members of the Biosimilar Forum represent the majority of the U.S. biosimilar programs in development at the FDA and are subject to the user fees we are discussing today. The Biosimilars Forum is solely focused on biosimilars and the associated policies necessary to foster a vibrant U.S. biosimilars market that delivers high-quality, safe, and effective biosimilar medicines over the long term. This singular focus on biosimilars is important. It is a recognition that biosimilars are unique, they are not generic drugs, and they are not branded biologics. Biosimilars are a new and distinctive industry sector created by Congress via the Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act, or BPCIA, and governed by new and individualized policies and regulations solely devoted to this sector of the biosimilar pharmaceutical industry. In fact, FDA's regulatory treatment of biosimilars reinforces the uniqueness of each product through the agency's approval pathway, naming policy, and pharmacovigilance efforts. This distinction is important to the members of the forum and something on which we continuously work to educate our partners. As we work together to build this new industry, we all need to look at biosimilars with a different lens that acknowledges this distinction. The Biosimilars Forum is proud to have participated in industry negotiations with the FDA regarding the reauthorization of BSUFA and greatly appreciates the cooperation of the agency and the other industry groups represented during the negotiations. The forum entered into BSUFA II negotiation process with 4 primary goals: ensuring solid financial support for the program, improving communication between the FDA and biosimilars product sponsors, increasing transparency during the approval process and regarding the spending of user fees, and preventing the expenditure of BSUFA funds on extraneous policy issues or activities that are not exclusive to biosimilars. Within BSUFA II, there are significant enhancements to the biosimilar user fee program that support the review and approval of biosimilar medicines in the U.S. These agreed-to enhancements include a revised review process meant to increase the transparency and communication that will facilitate an increase in the likelihood of first-cycle approval, agency commitments to complete and publish several draft and final guidance documents that will provide industry with additional clarity and certainty regarding the biosimilar development and review process, agency commitments to augment and strengthen staffing of the biosimilars program, including hiring product reviewers, and enhancements to the user-fee structure and management that will allow greater transparency, predictability, and long-term stability of the program in the U.S. Again, we encourage Congress to support the BSUFA reauthorization and provide the FDA with the necessary resources it needs to continue to build its program. Mr. Chairman, reauthorization of the BSUFA is key to successful implementation of the BPCIA, but I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that it is critical for all federal agencies to be consistent in their treatment and support of biosimilars and to recognize that this new industry has additional needs in order to further ensure that biosimilars will increase access and lower costs for patients who need these medicines. As noted, FDA has a responsibility for making clinical distinctions among products, and the agency's policies support the notion that each biosimilar is unique. Unfortunately, CMS did not share this view. Congress should require CMS to review its current reimbursement policy for biosimilars and make it consistent with FDA biosimilar policies. Specifically, FDA policy on biosimilars acknowledges the unique nature of each biosimilar, and CMS should align its policy by assigning unique, individualized billing codes to each biosimilar. FDA guidance to industry makes it clear that each biosimilar is approved in a distinct fashion with variances in approved clinical indications and interchangeability possible. FDA's guidance for industry on non-proprietary naming of biologic products further distinguishes individual biosimilars and brand biologics by setting out a naming system whereby different suffixes will be assigned to the name of the biosimilar and its reference products. CMS policy should likewise recognize this distinction for payment and reimbursement purposes. In addition, as the Biosimilar Forum works closely with patients and the providers who will prescribe biosimilars, it's critical that they understand the science behind biosimilars and the FDA's rigorous review process so they have confidence when using and prescribing them. We call on all stakeholders, including Congress, to support collaboration and education efforts to advance biosimilars. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I apologize I went over my time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Chair, thanks, gentlelady. Mr. Leisure, you're recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Good morning, Chairman Burgess, Ranking Member Green, and members of the Subcommittee on Health. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this important hearing. I'm Bruce Leisher, Senior Vice President and General Counsel, Momenta Pharmaceuticals, and the Chair of the Biosimilar Council Board. I had the opportunity to participate in the BSUFA 1 as well as the BSUFA 2 negotiations in those capacities. The Biosimilar Council is a division of the Association for Accessible Medicines. It works to ensure a positive regulatory and policy environment for biosimilar products and educates the public and patients about the safety and effectiveness of biosimilars. We're deeply committed to accessible, affordable, and high-quality medicine, and we strongly support the BSUFA 2 package. I'd like to start with a personal story. As someone who's worked in the biotechnology industry for over 25 years and in the biosimilars industry since its inception. About 8 years ago, I appeared before the House Judiciary Subcommittee on Courts and Competition Policy to support the BPCIA. Many of the witnesses testified about their fears of biosimilars, how biosimilars were more complicated than generics, and how we should be very careful about proceeding with biosimilars legislation. I testified about how significant scientific innovation would address these concerns and make biosimilar competition possible. I emphasized that American ingenuity would make us global leaders by enacting legislation that did not put a ceiling on biosimilar innovation. Congress listened and acted with courage. It passed the BPCIA. American innovation was unleashed. Many prior opponents of biosimilar competition entered the business, and today we have a growing and thriving biosimilars industry, creating good jobs and leading the world with our innovative science, particularly in the science of more fully understanding our biologic products. Today, Dr. Woodcock reported that over 64 biosimilar programs were under review for development of 23 different biologic products. Momenta alone has 7 biosimilar development programs. This was made possible by the BPCIA and by BSUFA 1 user fee funding. We learned in BSUFA 1, however, that the innovation involved in biosimilar development, that is the science of understanding what is in a biologic for comparison purposes, is complicated, involves many new skills that the industry and the FDA need to understand. This requires new staff and training to assure high quality and efficient review. Historic FDA staffing cannot meet these needs. Reviews which depend far less on clinical data and far more on new innovative scientific techniques that demonstrate that a biosimilar is highly similar to the reference product and has no clinically meaningful differences. In addition, even more innovation is underway to allow for approval of interchangeable biologics, which can be shown to perform the same in any given patient, and when approved, substituted at the pharmacy like generic drugs. This innovation is what makes biosimilars competitive, affordable, safe, and effective for patients, but these innovations squarely depend on having the critical additional FDA resources to be funded by BSUFA 2. Innovation was used to craft the BSUFA 2 commitment letter. We took a hard look at the first 5 years. Not only are new FDA resources needed, more efficient regulatory approaches that use funding more wisely
are necessary to accelerate FDA review. Together, we included innovations from BsUFA 1 and PDUFA to enhance the review process and to ensure regulatory clarity. The BsUFA 2 user fees are now tied to the level of resources needed and adjust with resource demand. It's also important to emphasize that the funding provided by user fees is in addition to, not a substitute for, congressional appropriations. An expenditure is contingent, as in the past, on an appropriate spending trigger. Specific improvements include enhanced communication and meeting opportunities that eliminate unnecessary delays, using resource capacity planning to set budgets, staffing levels, and fees, adopting the highly effective program review model to increase first cycle application approvals, commitments to dedicate staffing and to issue regulatory guidance to promote best practices and predictability, and expanding biosimilar public education activities. Each improvement accelerates high-quality development and review to help assure that patients have more timely access to life-saving, affordable, safe, and effective biosimilars. So in conclusion, BsUFA 2 is the culmination of months of hard work and negotiations between the FDA and industry. It represents a careful balance among the stakeholders. We respectfully urge the committee to approve a clean draft of BsUFA 2 without changes to the underlying agreement. Timely passage is important to ensure patients have access to life-saving biosimilar medications that they require. This historic agreement provides a critical step toward accomplishing this goal. Thank you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Chair, thanks, gentlemen. Ms. Holcomb, you're recognized 5 minutes for an opening statement, please.
Mr. Chairman, what an honor it is to speak with you today. In 1992, this committee planted the seed that has grown into user fee programs that provide FDA with a significant portion of the resources it needs to ensure that patients have timely access to safe and effective medicines. This committee also successfully produced, with an overwhelming bipartisan House vote, the BPCIA, legislation that established an FDA pathway for the approval of biosimilars. Bio was an early and strong supporter of this legislation to create a balanced pathway for greater competition in the biologics marketplace and of the user fees to make that work. Bio is the world's largest trade association representing biotechnology companies, academic institutions, state biotechnology centers, and related organizations across the United States and in more than 30 other nations. Our membership includes most of the large biopharmaceutical companies, but the vast majority of our members are small biotechnology companies working on the most cutting-edge R&D. Bio is proud of the innovative spirit and dedication of these small companies. I want to focus my comments today principally on the reauthorization of the Biosimilars User Fee Program. We believe the BsUFA reauthorization proposal you are considering meets all of our overarching goals and supports and enhances the Biosimilars User Fee Program. We strongly support timely reauthorization of BsUFA. During the course of BsUFA 1, FDA issued guidance documents to assist sponsors and other stakeholders to understand the agency's expectations and how this new process would work. They also issued final guidance on naming for biosimilar and innovator biological products to establish a way to provide clarity for prescribers and patients and to assist pharmacovigilance. In addition, FDA issued 5 guidance documents that remain in draft, including the most recent draft guidance on the agency's views on determining interchangeability. Bio continues to urge that the agency finalize this draft guidance as quickly as possible, as interchangeability is an important component of promoting the biosimilars marketplace. Because of both the complexity of the products and the novelty of this category of highly similar or interchangeable products, We recognize that these early years necessarily have been a time of learning and building. And although 4 new biosimilars products approved since enactment of BPCIA and initiation of BSUFA may seem like a small number, we are confident that the program and the availability of biosimilars to patients will grow as the agency builds expertise and capacity. With this as background, Bio worked with FDA, other industry organizations, and other stakeholders to develop proposals for continued progress in enhancements during BSUFA 2. Some of the key commitments have already been mentioned here, and I am not going to mention them again. The hope is that these new programs under BSUFA 2 will enhance the ability of sponsors and patients to work together to get biosimilars to the marketplace. I want to mention in particular the BSUFA commitments that relate to financial enhancements of the program to provide sustainability for the BSUFA program and to provide commitments to hiring goals and moving forward with FDA's hiring of the skilled staff that it needs to do its job. Bio has long-standing views about the negative potential consequences of the sequester of user funds or hiring freezes that can result in FDA's inability to fill vacancies and make the new hires that are necessary for meeting its commitments under these user fee programs. User fees support a significant number of FDA personnel, including those needed to carry out the BSUFA commitments. If FDA is unable to make these hires, user fees cannot be spent. This is a situation that is unacceptable to fee payers and is not good for FDA or for the patients who are waiting for the approval of biosimilar therapies. Finally, Mr. Chairman, I want to address very briefly your request to comment on the lower cost drugs through Competition Act. Bio supports competition in the prescription drug marketplace. We believe a robust competitive market exists today, but we also recognize that there can be more done to promote generic entry, particularly where an older off-patent drug has lost regulatory exclusivity yet lacks meaningful generic competition. We all want to see FDA approve generic drugs as efficiently as possible. Competition and greater choice are good for patients, and whatever reasonable steps can be taken to help FDA enhance its generic drug processes should be considered seriously. On behalf of Bio, I want to thank you for the opportunity to present our views today, and I'm happy to take any questions you may have.
Chair, thanks you. That concludes our witness testimony. We'll move into the question portion of the hearing. For our second panel, I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Goff, if I could start and ask you, you were here, I think, when Dr. Woodcock gave her testimony, and I think, if I understood correctly, she said that there is no backlog in the approval of generic drugs, and I would just ask you if you agree with that statement.
So there is a bit of a discrepancy between the industry and the FDA on that statement, whether or not there's a backlog, but it doesn't really matter what word you use. I do agree with Dr. Woodcock that all applications are currently under review, but if you look back at the original statutory backlog of GDUFA 1, there were 2,866 products in that category. There are now 1,500 in that category that are still not approved. So they are going back and forth under active review between the FDA and industry, but those are still sitting there. So they've been there for 4 years or longer. Add in year 1 and year 2 applications, and there's another 2,000 roughly, and those have been under review for at least 2 years.
Mr. Goff, staying with you, I guess the question is, the FDA met all of its goals under the first generic drug user fee agreement?
Yes, they have.
But then we continue to hear significant concern about review times, the number of cycles it takes to approve applications, the lack of communication between review division staff and applicants. So are you confident that the new agreements will address those concerns?
Yes, so in the first agreement in GDUFA 1, there were no solid metrics, I'll use that phraseology, for the pre-GDUFA and years 1 and years 2. In years 3, 4, and 5, there were solid metrics. So we've seen some significant advances in those years, and that's why we are asking the FDA to divide out the metrics, or the report out metrics, if you would, that they're giving us in cohort years so we can know how things are happening per year. When we look at a first cycle review of only 9%, that's looking over the entire cohort. We'd like to see what that looks like per cohort.
I guess what I'd like to get from you is a sense is what the FDA can do to substantially improve the review process, and what steps can industry then take to improve the quality of submissions on a more consistent basis?
So the steps we've taken in GDUFA 2 are a couple. One, Dr. Woodcock talked about the complex products, and so we have pre-application meetings that help us understand that happens with every one of the products under the NDA. Understanding there's only about 150 to 175 products there, but they have that opportunity to have those conversations before the application is even submitted. So both industry and the FDA knows what's coming in the door. Under GDUFA 2, we've done that in the complex products, and so we think that'll take large steps in getting to that first cycle review for complex. It doesn't fall for the non-complex products, but remember there's over 1,000 applications that are entered into the FDA every year for review and approval. That would be a huge resource drain to try to have those pre-meetings. We're working in that direction, but again, this is GDUFA 2, not PDUFA 6.
And thank you. I thank you for your responses. Ms. Holcomb, if I could ask you, I mean, you referenced in your testimony the learning and building that's been going on during the biosimilar user fee agreement course. If I understand correctly, there have been 4 approvals with biosimilars. Is that accurate?
Yes, that's accurate.
That seems like a low number.
It does.
So would you care to expound upon that?
We have hope. And I
We
know,
all have hope.
I know
Thank
hope,
you.
I know hope
This is a very
not
hopeful subcommittee.
As Dr. Woodcock mentioned, FDA is working with sponsors, biosimilar sponsors now, through the course of the biosimilar product development meetings on 64 development programs to 23 reference biological products. So we can't obviously predict that all 64 of these are going to turn out to have marketed products, but certainly some high percentage of them will. So we could move over the next few years, certainly over the next 5 years, from 4 products to 56, let's say, or even 46, which would be terrific.
Agreed, that would be terrific. Yield back my time and recognize Mr. Green for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Leichter, the first panel that Dr. Woodcock discussed the increasing number of meeting requests that the agency was receiving from sponsors. You mentioned in your testimony that one of the improvements under BIOSIMILAR 2 is enhanced communication and meeting opportunities that are hopefully helped eliminating delays in development and review of biosimilars. My first question, what improvements to these meetings with sponsors would be made under BIOSIMILAR 2, and why are these improvements helpful from your perspective?
So, yes, there are several improvements that have been made. One was that a discussion that we had with the agency about including specific reference to biosimilars in the pre-application IND best practice guidance document, as well as in the meeting guidance documents, which provide for specific responses, commitments to timeframes for responses, and And that can really enhance sort of correcting things in advance before an application is filed. The other piece is the adoption of the program review model, which was developed in PDUFA, so that when an application is filed, there are specific goals set within the agency for timelines. There's a pre-application meeting with the sponsor to work out complicated issues and make sure that what's filed is approvable. And there's a series of communications and responses to the applicant so that you can actually strive for a first cycle review the first time and do it right the first time.
Biosimilar 2 also moves from a 10-month timeline for review to a 12-month. Can you explain why this change was made and how will this impact the biosimilars?
The ultimate goal of the change was to get to first cycle approvals. What we believe was learned in PDUFA was that additional time was important to enable the communication that I was just discussing to occur so that we can actually respond to information requests and to communications in that time frame and actually finish it the first time rather than have it coming back and then waiting another 6 months beyond the 10-month period.
And our goal, again, is to move with the process to make sure they do their job, but also move it quickly. Mr. Cockrell, the FDA approval process ensures drugs are safe and effective. Some have proposed policies to address pricing that circumvents that process. Do you have a position on whether we should look for solutions to pricing concerns that go outside the FDA approval process?
Thank you for that question. You know, Dr. Woodcock in her testimony talked about the FDA's process for going out to a manufacturing facility and being on the floor and really seeing what happens there. And they talked about looking at data on bioequivalence to make sure that the copy of the innovator product performs in exactly the same way. If we're getting drugs that haven't gone through that process, we don't have those same guarantees.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for both you and Mr. Gall. I think we all agree that generic drugs are saving money and making medicines more affordable to patients. In fact, the Association of Accessible Medicines estimates that the generics are saving Americans, families, over $4 billion a week. And while generics account for 89% of the prescriptions dispensed, in America it's only 27% of the total drug costs. That's why I think it's important we do what we can to reduce the barriers to generic competition and lower the often and burdensome costs of prescription drugs. Mr. Schrader and Mr. Bilirakis have proposed one way to address this important issue, and I'm interested in hearing what else could be done to increase generic competition in the market. Mr. Gall, what other policy proposal do you believe should increase generic competition and access to generic drugs? And also you, Mr. Cockrell. Mr. Gall.
Thank you. Dr. Woodcock also spoke earlier today about the REMS situation that we have, and so I know that in that bill that Representative Bilirakis and Schrader put forward, that was to have a study on REMS, but we don't need another study on REMS. We've been looking at REMS since I was at the GDUFA table in 2012 and working on solutions for that, and we've had solutions that have been presented even in the last 6 months that never quite make it into the bill. So REMS is one of the main indicators that prevents generic products from coming to market because we can't get the product to be able to develop it and develop the generic of the innovator.
Mr. Cockrell, or anyone with my last 19 seconds?
Well, you know, there aren't that many drugs with that type of REMS, but there are some big drugs in there. One of them in that category is the seventh most costly drug in the Medicare program. It's $2 billion a year. So making sure that there's a pathway to market for generic versions of those drugs and non-REMS drugs that have restricted distribution could be meaningful.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The chair recognizes Dr. Carter of Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for being here. Mr. Cockrell, Mr. Goff, I understand both of you are pharmacists. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Good, good. I want to talk about something. I want to talk about PBMs, pharmacy benefit managers, okay? One of my favorite topics. Mr. Cockrell, you say in your written testimony here, pharmacy benefit managers, the middlemen that insurers and employers pay to both administer prescription drug benefits and negotiate discounts from drug companies, play a crucial role using their large sales volumes and their ability to create formularies to force drug companies to offer deep price concessions. However, a share of the savings occurs to the pharmacy benefit managers themselves, and their contracts can be extremely complex, making it difficult even for sophisticated benefits administrators to determine whether they've achieved optimal savings. Let me ask you, when you have 3 companies that control almost 80% of the market, as we have here in this country, where we have 3 PBMs that control 80% of the market, wouldn't you agree that that's not much competition there? If you look at the pharmacy benefit managers and you look at their profits over the years, you see that they have exploded, that they have profits that have increased over 600%. Obviously, they are not doing what they were supposed to have done. Now, you go on to say that Congress could consider requiring greater transparency of contract terms and definitions between payers and pharmacy benefit managers. Such a bill has been introduced by Representative Doug Collins of Georgia, the MAC transparency bill that will call for more sunlight to be shed, for more transparency in our drug pricing system. I'd like to just get your comments on that, if you would, about how that could help us in bringing down drug prices.
Thank you for that question. PBMs, with their negotiating power, play an important role in bringing down drug prices. And then the important question is the ultimate payer, the self-insured employer or the insurance plan, getting adequate benefit? And of course, the PBMs have to make some money in that deal too. That's their business model. In my testimony in calling for transparency, that was not calling for public transparency on the price, but because these contracts are so complex and they have so many fees, the question is, are there standards around contract definitions as well as audit mechanisms and standards around lack of conflict of interest in the people who advise on PBM contracts that could be beneficial to the ultimate payer?
And listen, I don't have any trouble with anybody making money. You know, more power to them. And that's not what I'm getting at. But what I am getting at is that this is a shell game. They are ripping off the public, I'm telling you. And that is what is happening with the PBMs. They are not achieving what they set out to achieve and what we think that they are achieving by bringing down drug prices, because they are not passing them on. Yet they avoid transparency, and this is what this legislation is trying to do. There has to be transparency within the marketplace. I'll give you an example. We had the problem, as you're well aware of the EpiPen that went up to like $600 for a 2-pack. And when I was on the oversight committee, we had the CEO of EpiPen, of Mylan Pharmaceuticals, the manufacturer of that product, testify before us. And she's at the beginning. I, as a pharmacist, I was at the end. So she says, okay, when it leaves us, this is what the price is. And I'm gonna just make up a number, $150. When it gets to me, it's $600. What happens in between? That's what we're trying to figure out. In between is that man behind the curtain. In between is the PBM. They are the ones who are marking that drug up and not passing it on. This is causing a problem in the market, in the generic drug market. This is one of the reasons why prescription drug prices are so high, and this is why Representative Collins' bill, I think, is so essential and that we should pass it here in Congress, the MAC Transparency Bill. Again, I'm not opposed to anybody making money, but I am opposed when they are causing the public the distress that they're causing them by increasing drug prices the way that they are. Now, there are others who need to be held responsible, including pharmacists, including pharmaceutical manufacturers. All of us have a part in this. But the transparency needs to happen. It needs to happen not only so we can bring down drug prices, but the thing that's going to bring down healthcare costs altogether in our healthcare market is going to be more competition. That's why this hearing is so important. How can we bring about more competition within the generic drug market, within healthcare itself? That's what we're working on right now in Congress when we're talking about healthcare and we're talking about all the things that we are talking about here. How do we increase competition so that we can bring down cost? One of the ways we do that is through encouraging more competition within the generic drug marketplace. That is what we've got to do. That's going to bring the prices down. Just one quick example of how it does that in my own life. When I was still practicing, I had this little company down the road who decided they wanted to get involved and wanted to become a player in the pharmacy market. I think the name of the company was Walmart. They came up with this we're going to give you a 30-day prescription, a 30-day supply of generics for $4. I thought they were crazy. I said, man, there's no way. I can't even buy it that cheap. I bowed my back and I said, there's no way I'm going to do that. Well, guess what? A week later, I was doing it. A week later, I called my suppliers and I said, you got to do something. I got people walking out of that store and I'm not going to have that. That's the way you drive down drug prices, through more competition, through more manufacturers, generic drug manufacturers on the market. That is the answer. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on, but thank you very much.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman, recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, Dr. Schrader. 5 minutes for your questions, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Gaw, just to confirm, in the previous previous panel, Dr. Woodcock indicated there might be in the neighborhood of 183 sole source drugs where there's no generic competition. Would you agree with that number, roughly?
Roughly, yes.
Could you talk briefly about the pre-ANDA meetings and the increased communication in GDUFA and how you see this new process working out to make it even better?
Yes, in the pre-ANDA meetings, it gives the industry the opportunity to meet with the FDA prior to actually filing the application with the FDA. Could be one or more meetings. Those meetings allow that conversation back and forth between the agency and the industry so that they can determine if they're taking the right path or maybe they need to make a slight move in that path forward, so that when they do file their application, the application is usually substantially complete, and we would anticipate a first cycle review with that.
Good, very good. Ms. Holcomb, one portion of our bill, the Lowering Drug Costs Through Competition Act, trying to close a loophole in the tropical disease priority review process. Some bad actors have announced plans to access brand name priority review vouchers by buying the rights to manufacture a drug from overseas and then bring it back to the U.S. for approval without having to do any additional research or development. Would you agree that this program was intended to act as an incentive for new research, new drugs in the U.S. market, not just merely to adopt something from overseas?
I would agree that this program was intended to ensure that U.S. patients affected by these tropical diseases would be able to access safe and effective drugs to treat them. Our concern about the provision as it currently is written is worrying about taking away from FDA the ability to decide on an application-by-application basis what data are needed to provide an approval for a drug. So there may be cases where a company has perfectly legitimately marketed a drug and had it approved first in a country where these diseases are endemic, and then brings this application to the U.S. because U.S. patients are now being affected because they travel out of the country, for example. But if there have been legitimate, good, solid clinical studies that already have been done that are applicable to the U.S. patients who are affected by this condition, FDA will decide that maybe we don't need additional clinical studies. If FDA has a different view, then of course they should be able to say to the company, you need to do new studies. And sometimes that's going to happen for various reasons.
And that's what our bill, I think, is trying to get at, give FDA the final say using whatever appropriate studies are out there. Dr. Gaw, question on the risk management strategies and studies that we're trying to put in our legislation. Do you have any idea about the number of companies that may be restricted from accessing the market because of the REMS current provisions?
There's somewhere in the realm of 80 to 95 companies that have the restricted REMS.
Oh, so a substantial number.
And then there's another probably 40 to 45 companies that have a restricted distribution system set up, but it's not part of the REMS system.
Very good. And with that, I yield back, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thank you all.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Lance. 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon to the panel. Mr. Goff, following up on the chairman's questioning, do you believe it would be helpful for the FDA to have more pre-submission meetings for non-complex priority submissions?
I think the answer to that is it would always be more helpful, yes. I think it's a more complex process than that. As we talked earlier, there's around 1,000 applications that are filed every year. And with 1,000 applications and having 1 or 2 or 3 meetings with the FDA on 1,000 different products, probably so resource restrictive it couldn't happen. So in GDUFA 2, we agreed to start this process in complex products, explore it, and then we'll move forward from there.
Thank you. Is there anyone else on the panel who would care to comment? Thank you. Again, Mr. Goff, in your opening statement, you mentioned a more effective generic drug review program as a goal of your organization. Touching on GDUFA 2 pre and a submission communications pathway and information requests and division review letters, do you think these initiatives will reduce review cycles? And what are the additional ways your organization believes the FDA-sponsored dialogue could be enhanced?
So the potential does exist for that increased review and decreased cycle review time. In GDUFA 1, those information requests and division review letters were not part of the process, but we did negotiate with the FDA early on in GDUFA 1 to have them begin doing that, which they did, so we've now codified that in GDUFA 2. So that does give us the opportunity during a review cycle, whether it's chemistry, micro, bioequivalence, for the reviewer to give an information request, for example, to a company who would then have roughly 15 days to respond, and that could then move it right on in that still first cycle review process.
Thank you. Ms. Holcomb, good afternoon. It's always a pleasure to be with you. In your testimony, you note that BSUFA 2 addresses the hiring issue, which should result in improved processes and faster review times. Given that the reviewers are the same as PDUFA reviewers, do you believe the goals set out need to have any potential bandwidth issues for reviewers, or can we work together in that regard?
So BSUFA will benefit from the hiring goals that are included in the PDUFA agreement that this committee is going to consider at a subsequent hearing, because of the fact that the reviewers are the same.
Are the same, yes.
One of the issues with getting biosimilar products approved has been that when FDA was not sufficiently staffed in CDER and CBER in general, these reviewers who were reviewing 2 categories of products now just were simply overwhelmed. So we need to have changes in the hiring processes. We need to have some of the changes in 21st Century Cures, and we need to be sure that FDA is going to be able to meet those annual commitments for hiring.
Thank you. And I'm so pleased we don't have acronyms here in this.
We don't use acronyms.
No. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair thanks the gentleman. Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu. 5 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, a thank you to each witness. You did a terrific job. And I want to point out something that maybe some of you don't know. Maybe everybody does. But even if everybody does, it's still worth saying it for the record. And that is that Kay Holcomb said when she began her testimony, it's such an honor to be here. Here was her home. Kay Holcomb is one of the most distinguished individuals to have served on the staff of the Energy and Commerce Committee. And I remember so well the farewell reception for Kay. Boo-hoo. We were all boo-hooing. But that reception was filled with Republican senators, Democratic senators, Republican House members, and Democratic House members. I mean, the breadth and the depth of her knowledge, her professionalism, and that recognition on a bipartisan basis is something that I will never forget. And I don't think there are that many people that could bring that kind of a crowd together. So she is a superb professional, and you know what, Kay? It's an honor to see you. And I waited so I could say this. I waited so I could say this because I've got to get out to Dulles. But, Wheels Up and Westward Bound. There's something in listening to the testimony of everyone here today and members, almost to a person, have spoken about how the generic industry has grown, what it offers the American people, that generic drugs now account for 89% of prescriptions that are dispensed in the United States, and that it saved the United States healthcare system some almost just rounding it off when you're talking about trillions, right? $1.5 trillion. That's not just walking around money. That's not just loose change. And that's a period of a decade, over a decade. So my question to you is, that's a huge number, and the savings are huge. Why do we have such a problem with the pricing of drugs in the country? It should be coming down, not going up, according to these statistics. Can any of you speak to that?
I could speak to it from a biologics perspective.
Yeah, short, because I have another question too.
We don't yet have the biosimilars pathway up and running at the full tilt, essentially, as Kay spoke to earlier.
I know that one very well, believe me. I've shot more
the
bullets
saving-
across the
and
bow
with-
on it.
With the change in mix in products heavily to the biologics end of the spectrum, without this, we had savings from
Well,
generics.
how much of the generic industry would you say that biologics is?
It's the biosimilar, how much of the generics industry is biologics? I'm not sure I understand the
Well,
question.
you're saying that biosimilars have really not arrived yet, and I agree with you.
In the marketplace.
The Obama administration dragged their heels. I don't know what this administration is going to do. We don't have interchangeability. The pricing is what CMS has done. I think they've screwed it up. So, it's not good, I don't think.
So what
I would give it a C- so far.
What I would say is the majority of the highest selling products today are shifted over to the biologics end of the spectrum, so the opportunity to capture savings from generic substitution has declined as the biologics have taken the lead.
I don't know.
If
I appreciate what you've said. I'm not so sure in terms of the numbers that are stated and where we are in terms of drug prices, there's, I don't know, is there a fact gap in this, Kay? Do you want to take a stab at it?
Well, I think it's key to point out the numbers.
Is your name Kay?
I'm sorry. No, it is not.
Kay?
I don't know whether there are some fact gaps, which are much longer than a 5-minute conversation, but I do think that increased competition in the marketplace is going to drive down prices. And as Bruce pointed out, the biologics marketplace is at the chic end of the spectrum. And as we have more biosimilars entering that marketplace, I think we are going to see a difference. With the number of programs in development now, and my speculation is that these programs represent the top used and the top selling biological products. These are the ones that are going to have biosimilars first. And I think we will, by the end of this next 5-year period, we will be able to predict much more accurately what is going to happen in terms of the overall marketplace as we get more of these products on the market.
Thank you very much. My time is up. Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair thanks the gentlelady. Before I yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Goff, did you have something you wanted to offer us?
I was just going to point out the facts that you're talking about. So 11% of the products on the market account for the opposite of 27. So 11% of the products on the market, the brand products, account for 63% of the dollars that are being spent. And those prices you see going up all the time, whereas in generics, that's where the savings report comes. You see the savings from the generics and the prices typically going down. And competition is what drives that. Thank you.
Chair thanks the gentleman, and Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes for questions, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I mentioned earlier with the first panel, I believe as this committee looks at policies to encourage and support robust generic competition, that we must also examine the barriers that are currently preventing generic access. And so if I could start with Mr. Goff, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. In her testimony, Dr. Woodcock noted that certain brand companies are using REMS programs to delay or deny generic manufacturers access to reference product. Can you please discuss further ways or the ways in which certain brand companies directly or indirectly refuse access to the reference product for generic drug development?
Yes, thank you. In the REMS program, they are set up under, and not all REMS, there are multiple different levels of REMS, but in the REMS ITASU programs, they are set up where they are restricted distribution programs. It's much like an early drug investigational review product where you keep tight controls so that you know exactly where each tablet, capsule, or injectable vial went to from a patient standpoint. They've done the same thing in the REMS, and so when you try to buy or try to purchase that, since you are not a qualified patient, if you will, you don't get access to those drugs. And even though the REMS was not set up for that, and there is a process currently where you contact the FDA writes a letter to the company, that's really the only thing that happens. There's no stick to that, if you will.
Thank you. I didn't realize that Dr. Woodcock was here. I really love the fact that you stay for the second panel. You're one of the few people that does that. Mr. Leiker, I also understand, well, I want to ask you something about utilizing restricted distribution programs also. But that was a tactic that Turing was utilizing to block competition to Daraprim. Can you discuss how certain brand companies are using the restricted distribution practices also to block access to reference product and the types of product that these practices are being used for?
Oh, thank you for the question. And what I'd like to add to is this is not just a REMS problem. And it's actually a much bigger problem, actually, in many respects in the biosimilars business, because when we're developing generic drugs, we need a smaller quantity to do analytical testing. When we're developing biosimilars, we have to do clinical trials with blinded vials and purchase very large quantities to do the adequate studies. And when you call a wholesaler to purchase a drug with an adequate medical license or pharmacist license, what you're finding increasingly today is wholesalers saying we can't sell it to you because you're doing biosimilar testing. And when we ask why, it's because they have to provide our name to the manufacturer, and the manufacturer says you can't supply it. And that's the reason why we strongly support the Fast Generics Act or the CREATES Act as a solution to make that practice unlawful. Because it ought to be a condition of approval that products are made available to licensed, regulated companies by the FDA to develop biosimilars.
Okay, thanks. One more question of Mr. Kokel. In your testimony, you discussed a landscape with a number of different drug pricing challenges, including launch prices and year-over-year increases. You've also talked about the need to increase generic competition, specifically policies to ensure generic companies have access to samples of the reference product for bioequivalence testing. Could you describe how that policy could be implemented in a way that yields the most savings?
Yes, sir. So first of all, REMS are there to protect patients, and we have to make sure that those protections remain in place, but that's completely doable. And then there's sort of two pieces to it. One is, can the generic company get access to the product for purposes of testing? And there's a number of mechanisms, and a couple have just been mentioned in the pieces of legislation that were mentioned. And then the second piece is, can the company marketing the product that's under a REMS have access to the REMS program itself, which is another barrier. So they have to be able to get the product for testing, and then they either have to be able to negotiate their way into a shared REMS program or stand up their own independent REMS program. And the FDA needs discretion to help them find the right solution on that latter part.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all, and I thank the chairman also, because it's my hope that the committee continues to discuss legislation to promote generic competition, and that we also consider policies that will address the use of REMS as a barrier for generic entry. One of the concerns I have, Mr. Chairman, is I'm starting to hear from, different people will say, well, generics really aren't a factor in trying to, keep drug prices down, and I continue to believe that they are. I'm kind of shocked by the fact that, even some of my colleagues will say that they're not. So I think it's important, the things that we're discussing today and in the future. Thanks again.
Gentleman yields back. Chair thanks the gentleman, and seeing that there are no further members wishing to ask questions, I do want to thank our witnesses for being here today. It was a long hearing, and I appreciate your indulgence. Two unanimous consent requests, or three unanimous consent requests from Mr. Schrader to enter into the record a letter from Premier, an alliance of 3,700 hospitals, the American Academy of Ophthalmology, and a letter from the American Academy of Dermatology. And then further, Mr. Long of Missouri had asked that we include a letter from the Federal Trade Commission in the record. So without objection, so ordered. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record. I ask the witnesses to submit their response within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions, and without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. I didn't realize.